Right now, decide to lift your hand. Don't think about it. Just decide and lift it. Done? Here's the thing. By the time you felt that decision happen, your brain had already made it, up to 10 seconds earlier. Not 10 milliseconds. 10 full seconds. Long enough to take a breath, change your mind, and breathe again. The you that thinks it just chose to lift your hand wasn't choosing. It was watching the choice happen, then telling itself a story about being in charge. And almost no one talks about what this means, because the answer is far stranger than you'd think. It might mean you've never made a single decision in your life. Let's start with what we mean by a decision. When you feel the urge to do something, drink water, send a text, get out of bed, there's a moment that feels like the beginning. The moment you decided, you wanted, then you acted. But what if that moment isn't the start of anything? What if it's the end of a process that was already finished, and your job was just to notice? For most of human history, this question was philosophy, free will, determinism, untestable. Then in 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet at UCSF measured two things at once: the exact moment a decision happened in the brain, and the exact moment the person felt themselves decide. And what he found: break something you rely on every day. Here's what Libet did. He hooked volunteers up to two machines. The first was an EEG. The second was a clock with a fast-moving dot ticking every 2.5 seconds. The instructions were simple. Sit quietly. Whenever you feel like it, flex your wrist. And remember the exact position of the dot at the moment you decided to move. That last part was the experiment. Libet compared three things: the brain signal that prepared the movement, the conscious moment of deciding, and the actual physical action. The brain signal already had a name: the readiness potential, a slow electrical buildup in the motor cortex. German researchers had discovered it in 1965. Everyone knew the brain prepared for movement before the muscles fired. What nobody knew was where the conscious decision sat in that timeline. The intuitive answer was simple. First you decide, then your brain prepares, then you move. Libet measured it. He got something else. The readiness potential started 550 milliseconds before the muscle moved, then 200 milliseconds, then you. Half a second of brain activity. Then your decision arrived, then your finger moved. The brain had been preparing the movement for 350 milliseconds before the person felt themselves decide. Think about that for a second. The choice was already in motion before you knew you were making it. Now you might be thinking, okay, 350 milliseconds. That's barely anything. Maybe Libet just measured wrong. That's exactly what most neuroscientists thought for the next 25 years. People wanted it to be wrong, because if it was right, something fundamental about being a person was a lie. But here's where it gets strange. When better technology came along, the gap didn't shrink. It exploded. In 2008, a team at the Max Planck Institute in Germany ran a new version of Libet's experiment. The lead researcher was Chun Xiong-sun. The new tool was functional MRI. Instead of measuring scalp activity, fMRI watches blood flow inside the brain in real time. They put volunteers in a scanner. Press a button on the left or the right whenever you feel like deciding. Note the time you decided. Then they trained an algorithm to predict which button each person would press. Here's what's fascinating. The algorithm could see the decision coming 7 full seconds before the volunteer felt themselves decide. In some cases, up to 10. 7 seconds is enormous, longer than most people can hold their breath underwater, long enough to walk across a room. The prefrontal cortex was already showing a pattern that revealed the answer. That's not equipment lag. That's the brain making a decision, holding it, slowly transmitting it upward to consciousness, like a press release going out long after the meeting ended. The you in the chair, waiting to feel the urge, was the last one to find out. Other labs replicated it. The order never changed. Now let's go back to the operating room, because the most haunting version of this didn't happen in a scanner. It happened inside a person's open skull. In 2011, neurosurgeon Itzhak Freit at UCLA had something Libet and Sun could never get. Patients with electrodes already implanted deep inside their brains, not on the scalp, down in the tissue, listening to individual neurons fire. These were people being treated for severe epilepsy. While the electrodes were in place, they agreed to help with a simple task. Press a button whenever you feel like it. Tell us when you decided. Freit was listening to single neurons in the supplementary motor area, the cells that prepare voluntary movement. Within recordings of about 256 neurons per patient, an algorithm could predict the decision a full 1.5 seconds before the patient felt it. But here's the part nobody talks about. The neurons would slowly build up activity, crossing the kind of threshold. From that moment, the decision was mathematically locked in. The patient hadn't felt anything yet, but the brain was already past the point of return. Imagine sitting in a chair, conscious, awake, waiting for the urge, and on the other side of the room, a researcher is already writing down which hand you'll use. Before you know, that happened to real people, with their skulls open. Now forget the operating room. You don't need electrodes to feel this. Watch yourself tonight. You're standing in a grocery aisle looking at 2 brands of pasta. You pause. You pick one up. You feel like you decided. But trace it backwards. Why that one? The color of the box? The price? Something your mother used to buy? You can't find the reason. You only find the action. Or this. You're typing a text. You write something. You delete it. You write something else. You hit send. And later you can't remember why you changed your mind. There was no debate, no moment of choice, just the typing, then the deleting, then the new sentence, like you were watching someone else do it. Or the worst one, the text you didn't send at all, the call you didn't return, the no that came out of your mouth before you knew you were going to say it. That's the gap. It isn't in the lab, it's in your kitchen, your phone, your mouth, every day, and once you start watching for it, you can't stop seeing it. Here's where it gets stranger. The unsettling part isn't the gap, it's what your brain does after. When you feel yourself decide, that feeling carries a strange weight. It feels authored. It feels like it came from you. A psychologist named Daniel Wegner at Harvard gave it a name in 2002. He called it the experience of conscious will. And he argued something brutal. The feeling of conscious will is not the cause of your actions. It's a story your brain tells itself, after the fact, to make sense of what your body's already doing. Wegner ran experiments to prove it. When people were tricked into thinking they caused something they didn't, they felt the will, the intention, the ownership, as real as any decision they ever made. And when they actually caused something, but the timing was wrong, they felt like they didn't. The feeling of choice doesn't track the choice. It tracks a pattern your brain recognizes a choice like. But here's the part nobody talks about. What if that feeling was a label, not a cause? A timestamp your brain stuck on a process that was already complete. The you that felt in charge wasn't steering. It was riding shotgun, watching the road, and convincing itself it was driving. Think about that for a second. Here's the thing. None of this means free will is dead. The Libet experiment has been criticized for 40 years. The criticisms are real. The decisions in the lab are tiny. Press a button, move a finger. A simple motor twitch may not behave like a moral choice. And then there's the veto. Libet himself believed that even if the brain initiated the action, consciousness could still stop it. Free won't, instead of free will. A few hundred milliseconds of ability to say no. Some philosophers argue that's enough. The part of you that vetoes is the part that matters. Others say even the veto is a process you didn't author. Mainstream neuroscience hasn't settled this. There's no clean answer. There's just the gap. And the gap doesn't go away. And then there's the deeper question that nobody has answered. If your brain makes the decision before you feel it, who is the you that feels it? It's not the part that decided. The decision was finished before that you showed up. It's not the part that acts. By the time the action happens, the decision has been forwarded to motor neurons that fire on their own. So what is this thing in the middle? The part that watches the decision arrive, takes credit, remembers it as its own. We don't know. Some neuroscientists think it's a narrator, a storytelling system whose only job is to assemble what's happening into a coherent autobiography, not the author of your life, the biographer. What if the experience of being someone is just a system taking notes on a life it didn't choose? And what if that's why it feels so real? Right now, decide to lift your hand. Don't think about it. Just decide. And as your hand starts to rise, ask yourself one thing. Where did that come from? Not the muscle, not the nerve, the wanting. You can't find it. It just was there. The moment that felt like you deciding has been measured. And it isn't a beginning. It's a middle. The beginning happened earlier, deeper, somewhere you've never been allowed to visit. You didn't choose the decision. You only chose the story.